when I was a kid, I was very weak, docile, and emotional. That's why I didn't get into trouble as a kid, because any time I got remotely shouted at for whatever it was, I would instantly start crying. It would just come over me and I could not stop. Even, like, I remember there's times when I just failed at simple stuff and I'd start crying. I was just such an absolute crybaby doormat. Um, Even if now I remember my mother saying to me, "Oh, if anyone hits you, you hit them back. You know, if people start bullying you at school or whatever." But what I realized when I was in school is that if you hit someone back, you get in trouble, and you get equally as in trouble as the other person. It seemed, you know, doesn't matter if they started the fight, you hit them back, so you need to be punished as well. You reacted to that situation in an uncivilized manner. And it's the same in like adult life as well. If you're getting into a fight with someone, no matter if they started it, no matter if they provoked it, if you hit them back, if you engage in that fight, you are likely to get arrested as well. Even if you were defending yourself, defending those around you, you are probably going to get arrested as well. And that's just a whole other topic, but this is part of the reason why I was such a weak youngster. While I just never really spoke out, I was just a good boy. Good boy. The amount of times I hear that from people, it's so annoying. I was just a good boy. I was just like, oh, yes, miss. No, sir. Yes, miss. Yes, sir. I just did not think for myself. And this is kind of what the school system does to you, you know. You are told to behave, you're told how to do things, you're told to when to do things at certain times. And of course, the people that rebel against that are put in detention or, you know, seen as disruptive. And there are some genuine people I remember from school who were disruptive, who had no respect for anyone, who just thought it was funny to be disorderly. And now their lives are just not where they want to be, and it's kind of sad. But that was my experience being a boy. I was just very, very weak. Weak in my communication, physically weak, my whole mindset, such as that. And of course, as I grew up, you know, I learned to stop crying at my failures. I learned to, you know, take things on the chin, but I still had so much more to learn. And it was when I was quite late, actually, I think, what was it, 2023? So that's, might actually be 2022. I was around 16 or 17 when I started going to karate class. I remember walking into this building with my dad, and he went up to the karate instructor. He was just about to start the class, and he said, "Oh, I want to sign my son up for this. You know, we kind of want to toughen him up a bit." I remember my mum saying to the karate instructor, saying that, "Oh, he's kind of weak," and I was like, "Oh, thanks, mum and dad. I appreciate it." But they were right. I was weak. I remember my first ever karate lesson, I went to do a karate kick, but for some reason I jumped at the same time, and I landed straight on my side with a great big thud. Everyone turned around and looked at me. I, of course, started laughing because I was like, well, it was bound to happen at some point. The next day, my back was completely in pieces. I could not go to the next karate lesson after that. I had to have a rest. And from, you know, learning more about fighting technique and such, I became more confident myself. I became a lot more disciplined. And I remember the karate instructor's father, who also did karate, who was also a member of the club back in the day. Something that he'd always said at like awards ceremonies that we had is, sometimes when someone's picking on you, the best thing you can have is to know you can fight them and walk away. And he said this so many times, and when I first heard it, I was like, oh, okay, well. But when I actually thought about it, how profound it is, that is what being a man is, I think. That is how you transition from being a boy to a man, because you have two types of boy, right? You have the boy who is very, like I was, who was very docile, very weak, who just lets people walk all over him. And then you have the boy who's trying to fight against the system, but he's constantly put down for it. You know, young boys are very excitable. Young boys, you know, they play fight, they have competition, they want to be better than everyone else. But that is stomped out of us. That masculine essence and aggression inside of us is stomped out. And sadly, if that's stomped out too much, that's where you get men, being football hooligans, getting into fights, getting locked up, all of these other things. So what we need to learn is that we need to teach young boys how to handle themselves and how to assess situations properly. And it's not this sort of internet Andrew Tate persona that a lot of young boys fall into. I don't think 14-year-olds should be watching Andrew Tate. I do agree with quite a lot of what he says, but a lot of it is, I think, just satirical and he is playing a character. That being said, although the internet it certainly has been very useful for me for learning a lot of stuff about masculinity, I think young boys are very impressionable and they need to go through their own kind of development and their own kind of knowledge and actually assess things. Because, I started wanting to improve myself at 17 years old, and I've been through so many phases where I was trying to reject femininity, embrace masculinity, totally masculine. I've certainly come a long way. I'd say when I was a kid, I was overly feminine when I was naturally masculine at core. But I still hold on to my feminine side a little bit. I am the majority masculine, but also have a little bit of femininity. And I think the combination of the two creates serendipity. It creates peace. It creates balance. A lot of guys say balance isn't achievable, but life is a balancing act. Balance is achievable. You don't have to be an extremist in anything to succeed. And as I said, it was the ability to know I could fight someone but walk away that I think is the ultimate masculine experience. You see guys like Bruce Lee, Jackie Chan, all of these great fighters who they could literally break people's necks if they wanted to. They had so many great techniques, but when they're talking in interviews, they're very calm. They're very, you put water inside of a cup, it becomes the cup. You put water into a bottle, it becomes the bottle. Put water into a teapot, it becomes the teapot. Now water can flow, or it can crash. Be water, my friend. Stuff like that. Like, that's Bruce Lee speaking. And he was arguably one of the greatest fighters of all time. Could do so much damage to someone, but yet spoke in this calm way, spoke in this philosophical, calm way. And another reason why a lot of boys are struggling is, of course, the lack of father figures. A lot of boys have father figures that are not showing them the way, that are quite weak and docile themselves, who are slaves to comfort and desire. And then sadly, you have the boys who don't have fathers, or maybe their father's abusive, maybe their father walked out on them, maybe they're living with single mothers, whatever it is. A lot of boys are struggling to have that masculine role model, and that's what, characters like Andrew Tate, Tristan Tate, that's why they're so attracted to young boys. And I think it is great that masculinity is being embraced and not being shunned, and people are starting to revive it. But you need to go about it in the right way. Be more masculine, go to the gym, start being disciplined, stop chasing your lust and desire, and actually think about what you actually want. Chase real dopamine, like walking, the sun, meditation. But don't completely reject femininity. I'm not saying, you have to go around wearing dresses and all that, but things like empathy is quite important. A lot of guys reject that, but who's ultimately going to have more weapons at their disposal? The guy who's 100% masculine and only has courage and discipline and all of these masculine traits? Or the guy that has a good ratio, an 80%, 20% ratio? He's 80% masculine, but also 20% feminine. He's able to be couraged and disciplined when he needs to be. Yet, he listens to great music that evokes great emotion in him. He has the empathy to understand where people are coming from and thus change his words to match the situation and to captivate the individual. He's the guy who has been able to understand what love is, who embraces love, who is totally present with his loved one, who has this feminine presence, who understands the femininity of nature and enjoys basking in it. Because he hasn't rejected femininity. It shouldn't be a case of reject modernity, reject femininity, embrace masculinity. It should be embrace masculinity, embrace femininity, and maybe reject modernity, because I'm a traditional guy at heart. So we need to embrace the two in order to be the ultimate man. That's how we go from boy to man. Some boys are way too feminine when they shouldn't be. And hey, if you're a feminine individual, that's perfectly fine. If that's natural to you, you go for that. But some boys are too feminine. Some boys are too masculine. What makes a man is when you have a harmony of the two. Embrace two. Stop trying to be something that you're not. Whether you can have a great ratio, as I said, it could be 80% masculine, 20% feminine, maybe 60% feminine and 40% masculine. Whatever it is, whatever works for you, you need to go on to that. That's how you be a real man. That's how you be the man you're supposed to be. Not all of these extremist red pill ideologies, especially not black pill ideologies. You've got to be happy with what you've got, what you're working with, and use it to your advantage. If you're a man who is very empathetic, but you're struggling with your discipline, your courage, your bravery, that's something you need to develop. If you're a man who has maxed out his courage, discipline, and bravery and built an amazing masculine physique, but struggle to relate to others, that's when you need to build on these feminine habits and choose the weapons at your disposal. What will work for you? Hope you've enjoyed this video, boys. Make sure you like, comment, share, subscribe. I see you in the next one. God bless, and as always, you take a very good care of yourself.